Zooming live from Hilltop Public House in Montgomery. I'm here with Carol Gundlach and Rodreshia Russaw, as well as our guests, Khadidah Stone and Letetia Jackson. In just one moment, I'll be turning it over to Tyler Pratt. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Just a heads up for folks who are on this call, we will be recording and posting to YouTube. So if you'd prefer to be off camera, you're welcome to do so now. Andrea, if I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrea Miller, as well, to record. So just giving everyone that heads up that we are recording. And I will turn it over to Tyler Pratt. Thank you.
Hey y'all, so great to see so many faces here. Looks like there's a few of me in the room. It might have been the link that I sent out, so I promise there's only one of me here. Hey y'all, I am Tyler Pratt. I'm the current managing editor for the Gulf States Newsroom, and we're here today talking with community members in District 2. We're also joined by colleagues here at the Gulf States Newsroom, community members. I see even former managing editor of the Gulf States Newsroom, Priska Neely, is here. Priska, I promise to come get my plants at some point that you've been watching for me over the holidays. So District 2 is a new congressional district in central and south central Alabama, and it makes up just about 13 counties spanning a portion of the Black Belt. It's from Mobile up through Montgomery to the Georgia border. And a large number of residents in the district are people of color. 49% is Black. The new district comes after a lengthy lawsuit arguing former district lines violated the Civil Rights Act and didn't allow Black Alabamians accurate representation in Congress. In November of last year, residents elected Shamari Figures to represent them in the U.S. House. He's Black, he has worked for the Obama administration, he's a Democrat, and he's also worked for the Justice Department. GSN's former community engagement reporter Maya Miller spent over a year diving into issues that impact this region and speaking with predominantly Black communities here. And she's been joined by our community engagement producer, Nellie Beckett, to connect with residents in this region. It's part of our work with America Amplified Elections. It's a public media initiative supporting community engagement journalism across public media. Nellie is leading this listening session. She's an Alabamian, a lover of literature, and an integral part of the GSN team. She's joined today by stakeholders in District 2, which we sometimes call D2. They are advocates for voting and human rights and working to help uplift marginalized communities. I now pass the mic to Nellie Beckett. Thank you, Nellie.
Thank you, Tyler. Hi, all, and welcome to Voices of District 2, a listening session made possible by the support of America Amplified. For the last year, community engagement reporter Maya Miller and I visited towns in District 2 and talked to residents there about issues that impacted them most when choosing a candidate. Common themes have included mental health, hospital closures, education, and food access. Today, we're talking to our panelists, who I'll introduce momentarily, to hear about the strengths of and the challenges facing this part of Alabama. I'd like to also thank our partners, the Hilltop Public House, who have been such a wonderful partner in community engagement and are hosting us for this listening session today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Rodreshia Russaw, director of the Ordinary People Society, a nonprofit that works to restore voting rights to the formerly and currently incarcerated, aid to the homeless, and mobilizing communities in the Deep South. I'd like to introduce Letetia Jackson, convener of the South Alabama Black Women's Roundtable, a voting rights advocate and a plaintiff in Allen v. Milligan, the lawsuit which argued that former district lines violated the Voting Rights Act. I'd like to introduce Khadidah Stone, Director of Field Operations for Alabama Forward, a voting rights advocate and also a plaintiff in Allen v. Milligan. And I'd also like to introduce Carol Gundlach, Senior Policy Analyst at Alabama Arise, a statewide member-led nonprofit advancing public policies to improve the lives of residents marginalized by poverty. You'll also hear Carol's voice in the story we're about to hear. I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Andrea Miller, who's going to play for us a piece of reporting by Maya Miller.
From WBHM News, I'm Andrew Yeager. Alabama's Black Belt is a region that grapples with food insecurity. It's an issue that candidates running for the House of Representatives in the state's newest congressional district will need to contend with after the November election. The Gulf States Newsroom's Maya Miller visits a food bank in Montgomery to see what resources there are to help keep families fed.
Cars line the side parking lot of Shiloh Primitive Baptist Church in Lounsboro.
Hey, what's going on now?
Volunteers slide laminated numbers onto their dashboards, numbers indicating how many families will be served today.
And let's do 4 bags of limes per family.
It's the first time this church has used a mobile food pantry. An 18-wheeler unloads dozens of pallets of fresh lettuce, potato chips, and orange juice. Food that residents like Viola Loving say has been a blessing.
They're God sent for people that don't have anything.
Loving has been living in her truck with her 3 dogs for almost a year now.
Like I said, them are little protectors.
She's on Social Security, which for her isn't enough to cover living expenses like rent and food. And recently, she got some maintenance work on her car. Not enough to fix it, but enough to keep her moving.
I couldn't afford it. That's another $400. I couldn't do it. That's a bite.
Loving says that sometimes she relies on the kindness of restaurants to stay fed.
Sometimes they'll give you a sandwich or some fries and a drink. Most of the time they say, we can't do that. We can't afford to give you anything. That would come out of our pockets.
So she's come to Shiloh, where she can pick up boxes of shelf-stable food to keep in her car. The mobile food pantry today is coordinated by the Heart of Alabama Food Bank, which, between partner pantries and affiliates, covers 35 counties.
The reality is that sometimes ends just don't meet.
That's Amy Dennis with the Food Bank, which distributes about 30 million pounds of food each year to the south central region of the state.
Even for people that have worked very hard. And so food banks and the programs that we operate like this one support people that have fallen in between.
According to the USDA, food insecurity affects 1 in 4 families across Alabama. It's one of the poorest states in the nation. Carol Gundlach is a senior policy analyst with Alabama Arise, a nonprofit focused on helping marginalized communities. She says rural residents can go miles without having access to fresh food.
If you don't have transportation, it's very, very difficult to get to a grocery store, to get to Montgomery, to get to Opelika, to get to, wherever where there are big grocery stores or Walmarts.
She says federal funding could really make a difference in this part of the state. Pandemic SNAP benefits ended in March, and prices at the store have been increasing.
I hope that District 2 makes a good decision when they vote, because we really desperately need resources, not just here, but all across the Black Belt.
So for now, food banks are left carrying a heavy load.
A valiant effort, but they cannot meet the need.
One thing food pantries in the region say they have a lot of right now, volunteers who are eager to step in. But Amy Dennis with Heart of Alabama says it's not enough.
Sometimes those dollars make the biggest difference. So they tell us time and time again, the reason we're not serving more people is because we don't have the money to purchase more food.
She says they'll continue to expand their networks with partner pantries and churches and hopefully reach thousands more next year. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Maya Miller.
The Gulf States Newsroom is a partnership among public radio stations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'm now going to transition to questions for our panelists. First up, I'd like to talk to Khadidah Stone, who was a plaintiff in Milligan versus Allen. Khadidah, what are some of the top issues that you think District 2 needs help with?
First, I just want to say thank you guys for allowing me to be in this space and talk to you guys. But I think one of the challenges that District 2 suffers from and needs to talk about is healthcare. So since 2010, we've had over about 15 hospitals to close. between the newly drawn District 2 and also District 7. And both of these districts do make up of the Black Belt counties. And so healthcare is definitely a need. And just to give you some data to back that. So the data shows that specifically for Bullitt County, which is one of the counties that's in District 2, for every 3,325 people, it's one physician that is there to take care of those folks. In Pike County, which is another county that's within this newly drawn congressional district, the data shows that for every 2,355 people, it's one physician there. And then Butler County, which is the highest that shows every per 4,876 people, it is one physician that is present to fulfill the needs of these folks. So with just that data given, I think it shows that, there is a need for healthcare physicians, there is a need for hospitals, there is a need for all of those things for people to have the adequate care that they need. And I think that it's such a disadvantage. When Carol talked about transportation for food, well, there's also a transportation for people getting to the doctor. It's absolutely unnecessary that you have people in District 2 that are traveling more than an hour to get to the doctor. That's not sustainable for any community. And it's definitely something that needs to be given a hard core look into. So yeah, that's what I feel like we need in Congressional District 2.
Thanks so much, Khadidah. I'm going to turn it over to Letetia, whose work was so instrumental in getting out the vote in District 2. What was a surprising or challenging aspect of the work of voter access in District 2 for you in this past year? I think you're muted, Letetia. Could you unmute for me, please?
Simple thing, technology. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for shining a light on the issues. I think one of the primary challenges that I saw initially was that there our Secretary of State's Office election divisions did not reach out to voters. Many voters we found were unaware of the fact that there was actually a new district drawn, that there was a new district, that they were in the new district. For instance, myself, I was in the old 2nd Congressional District. I'm not in the new Congressional District now, unfortunately. And I never received any notification. No one received any notification of what district they were in, where they were supposed to go vote, if their voting precincts change. So I think the lack of information from our agencies that are supposed to inform voters was one of the surprising things that I found. Also, I found a lot of excitement. We found in our work a lot of excitement around just the possibilities of having the opportunity to elect a representative that will actually be focused on issues that the citizens of the 2nd Congressional District find important and that are their priorities. So there was both excitement, there was a lot of education that needed to be done. And then we also ran across some apathy as well, because voters were feeling like their vote didn't really count, and that each time they go to vote, they did not see any change in their lives. So there was an array of things happening, but I think overall there was a level of excitement. There was a level of excitement in engaging new voters that had not been participating. Our focus at the South Alabama Black Women's Roundtable was focused on infrequent voters and voters who were actually registered but weren't voting every time, or would only vote in certain elections. And so we found in our outreach to them that they were excited at the opportunity to be able to have the opportunity to elect a representative of their choice that understands them and understands their issues. So I think it ran across the gamut as it relates to reactions, knowledge of the district, and voter participation.
Thank you so much, Letetia. I have a question for Carol, who's been working on poverty and policy in rural Alabama. In what ways could an elected official help you in your work?
Oh, my goodness.
We could spend an hour talking about that. I will say I also live in District 2, and one of the challenges was there were so many wonderful candidates, every one of which I loved. I think we've done well for ourselves, and I'm really pleased. We face a lot of threats, both at the federal and the state level, to people who are the most marginalized and the lowest income. And having another representative who cares about low income people is going to make every difference in the world. I think to us here in Alabama, there are struggles around education, healthcare. I could not agree more. We don't have a hospital in Tuskegee, which I'm close to. The hospital in Tallahassee is hanging on by their fingernails. So we have not expanded Medicaid, which would make a gigantic difference to healthcare in the second district and all over the state. We see threats to the SNAP food stamp assistance program. We see threats to Medicaid. We see money being diverted from public education for private schools. There are all kinds of gigantic challenges, and we need a champion. And I am really hoping that Representative Figures can be one of those champions.
Thanks so much, Carol. I'd like to turn it over to Rodreshia. Rodreshia, you're executive director of the Ordinary People Society. What a wonderful name that is. What are some of the strengths or assets of the community that you serve within District 2?
Wow, I'm so happy to go over this topic. And once again, thank you for having me as well. Well, first of all, our organization has been in existence for 24 years, and we take pride in living in Alabama. Alabama is where the civil rights movement was born. It's where a lot of leaders have come out, in particular District 2. There is such a unified cohesion of folks that have the rich history of Alabama that live in District 2. When I think about my mother and my grandmother and my grandmother's grandmother, and not only that, we think about leaders like Jesse Jackson and people that have trotted these lines, and think about that rich history that is happened in the South that now goes up north that the children speak about. It happened coming out of District 2 and the outskirts of District 2. And so this is some of the beauty that we're seeing, that communities are staying together. There's some economic development that needs to continue to happen. People are moving more into District 2. Folks are migrating from the storms from New Orleans. People are migrating from Florida. There's a lot of different weather crises that we're in right now. And they're finding that moving into districts like District 2, they're able to have good living. They're able to have affordable housing. They're able to have employment and live off of Social Security and disability. But unfortunately, with the increase in rising of costs everywhere, we are feeling the impact. But it's still the beauty that we need to hold in District 2, that this is a good place to come to live in and come from. And leaders are growing up in District 2. Look, we just had a new mayor over the last couple of years, a Black mayor. We just won District 2 for the Figures. And not only that, we have Terry Sewell, which is in District 7, that's making up now the second Black minority district. And so I just want to amplify that there is a rich history of leaders that have emerged, that are leaving our nation nationwide on the federal level as well. And those are coming down from the state.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you. That was such a great summary, Rodreshia, of District 2, our history, where we're going, and also the new challenges. I'd like to transition back to Khadidah. What are some of the strengths that you see within D2?
I think one of the strengths is the fact that people showed up. They made their voices clear. They made their voices known that they wanted better representation. They wanted adequate representation to fit their needs. And so I think that within itself is a strength. But I also agree with Rodreshia, what she said about people moving to District 2 for better employment, more affordable housing. I definitely think that is true. So yeah, that's what I would say is a huge strength, is the fact that people showed up and made their voices heard.
I'd love to hear the answer to that same question from Letetia. What are some of the strengths that you see within this district and within the people you serve?
Thank you for the question. I would actually agree with Khadidah. I think that there was a lot of unease and trepidation and second guessing and thinking about whether or not people would actually show up. And the one thing that we found and we saw, as I mentioned earlier, is the excitement that people had around the opportunity and the ability to be able to elect someone. So I think the fact that voters were actually engaged, that voters showed up. One of the things I've done just a cursory look at the numbers so far. I haven't done the deeper dive that I plan to do in the analysis of the numbers based on the outreach that we did. But what I've seen so far is that there were in a number of the counties in the congressional district where they had voters that had not been participating that showed up, and an increase in turnout in the voters. And I think one of the things that's important is when you see voters engaged in voting, that's a strength. That means that they're paying attention. That means that they are intent on having their issues heard. I think that the strength of the Black Belt itself, with the richness of the history, as Rodreshia mentioned earlier, the vast opportunities that are possible in the district, I think are part of the strengths. And I think the unity of the people. One of the things that I found as we were traveling in and around District 2 is that the people were really united, that there are real communities that are working together, that have been working together and are interested in continuing to work together. And I think that we have those of us who work in the voter engagement space, there's a lot of opportunity to be had in us continuing our voter outreach, our organizing in District 2. There are a number of cities and towns in the district that have majority Black populations, but are not being represented well, that we need to encourage voter participation and increase interest in changing those levels of government and representation. So there's any number of strengths that we need to capitalize on and help to continue to organize around. But I think the largest strength is basically what has been said already: the interest of the people and the fact that they showed that yes, they are paying attention, yes, they are involved, and yes, they want to have a voice.
Thank you so much, Letetia. And I'd like to turn that question last of all to Carol. What are the strengths of this district that you see?
When I first moved to Alabama from Texas, I didn't think I'd like it here. And what I had forgotten was this is where the civil rights movement happened. Mm-hmm. And these people are still here, and their children are still here, and their descendants are still here. This is where the movement is, and kind of where the heart of the beast, and kind of we are also the center of the change that needs to happen in this country. And so I think the strength of District 2 is its long and noble history and what people have kind of inherited from the movement and the struggle here. And so I have great faith. I despair over the poverty. I despair over a lot of things here, but I also have great faith in the people of this district and people of the Black Belt, including the 7th District, to make the change this country needs.
Thanks so much, Carol. Letetia, I'd like to go back to something you said. You said that you've not yet fully dived into the data, but still a lot of the data has borne out. People are engaged, people are showing up. The redistricting increased engagement, and that's so wonderful that the data raised. I'm wondering, and this is a question for all our panelists, so I ask this of Letetia, but I also invite others to chime in. What stories are maybe not yet being told by data, but that you're hearing anecdotally from folks in this district?
I think that the stories basically that what we've actually heard and what we've experienced and seen on the ground is the fact that people are actually excited and engaged, and they understand the issues and the needs of their community, and they want to be a part of making sure that the solutions that they feel are necessary are on the table and are being represented. We oftentimes talk about communities and districts, from a 35,000 foot level, but when you get down to the ground, people understand their needs. They understand the issues. They understand what their priorities are, and they also have the solutions. So I think part of what we need to what needs to happen is listening to the people on the ground. They know what they need. They know how to do it. They know how to talk to their neighbors. They know how to talk to their community, the community, and they know who the leaders are. They know their community. So we need to listen to the people. So if there is one thing that I say as the stories come out, we were talking to, for instance, one individual we were talking to about how people felt like they were not being heard, that they were not participating because they felt like they were not being heard. And in understanding what took place in order for them to have an opportunity to vote in this election, in this previous election, for a representative of their choice, it gave them a sense of excitement. One of the things that we found out is that people didn't even really know the history of how the district came to be. So once we had those conversations with people, you could see the excitement. They felt the responsibility that they carry in making sure that they turn their communities out. We had communities where people didn't have anything going on, never really participated, no election, no community, no organizing, no even candidates had ever even come into their area to talk to them. And they were excited. They were excited. They were excited to know that they had an opportunity to be a part of not only changing Alabama and what's going on in Alabama in District 2, but being a part of the national conversation and being a part of the national agenda. Because what people don't really talk about a lot is that District 2 made national history. We were on the national agenda in Alabama for the first time in my thinking, ever in a national presidential election. Alabama is always, at the bottom of the list. Nobody's going to put any resources into Alabama. Everybody always assumes that Alabama is going to go a certain way when we vote in the election, but District 2 changed that narrative. And the people of District 2, the ones that we engaged and talked to, understood what that meant. And I think that has a lot to do with why they showed up in the numbers that they showed up in. I'm really interested in digging into the numbers deeper. I haven't had an opportunity to do that yet, but as I said earlier, just from a cursory look, I saw increases in areas that had not participated before.
Down on some of the stuff that Letetia was talking about, and particularly to data. And I know some of the questions is like, what is some of that data that people don't know about? And one thing I want to zoom in on is the formerly and currently incarcerated count. Okay, when it came to us organizing and giving out information, particularly on redistricting, there were a lot of folks that had lost their voting rights, who weren't already involved in the voting process, that didn't have any knowledge of the voting process, and then also did not have that knowledge there, the redistricting process. And so as we began to organize through our collective of Alabama Election Protection Network, we began to find out what were the roadblocks to people getting to those hearings to hear about the redistricting changes. And then once the Milligan versus Allen was won, we continued to go on to push the fight to empower people to learn their rights. But we have to understand in that data, those datas aren't calculated particularly on the census. It's not particularly counted with inside of the VAN system. These are undocumented people that are not on the radar, who has their voting rights that were particularly stripped from them, who some of them don't even have access to a generalized cell phone, on online services, to a laptop and those things. So how do we count these people? So what do? We create our own data. Organizers such as us, Black Women's Roundtable, Alabama Forward, the groups that are part of that, we create our own stream of data where we calculate. For instance, we hold a soup kitchen in District 2 where we feed over 350 people. We do intake forms on all those people daily. and get their current information, because we can't find them if their numbers change. We can't find them on the band system. And if they've moved location, same thing with Letetia Jackson. She has a full garden out there. So she's feeding people, and as she's feeding those, she's collecting data. So that's the gap right there. The gap is, how do we get the numbers? One of those, the people that are within the prisons and jails, right? And how do we get the homeless population, which we know most of the majority of people that come into prison and jail homeless come back to homelessness. How do we count those folks? And how do we count the folks that are living under the shadows? And those are still undocumented folks that are of a Spanish and background and so on. So we have to really realize that there is a whole pool of data that we're missing, that we have to continue as organizers to gather within ourselves.
Carol, would you like to speak to the importance of data as well? What y'all are gathering, what you're seeing, or maybe what's not being represented?
Well, I think that in terms of what's not being represented are those personal stories, that it is really important to understand not just who doesn't have health insurance, but who these people are, because they're generally people who are working hard and trying to take care of their families, who fall through the cracks of our deplorable healthcare system. And so knowing those stories, knowing who these people really are, is tremendously important, which is why we at Arise are working hard on storytelling about real people who have real needs that may not show up in the census, or maybe not show up. And I'm a data nerd, but may not show up in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, but who are real people who have very real needs. I think you're absolutely right. We have a huge undocumented population that are people who are homeless, that are people who may be undocumented and not willing to respond to data requests. And these are the people that we are working hardest to serve. And these are the people that need to tell us what it is they need in order to take care of themselves and their families, because often they are folks whose real needs, even those of us who work the hardest as advocacy, may not be hearing from. So data's wonderful, but data's not the solution to everything.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to see when it comes to what kind of stories need to be reported on, just diving more into like what everybody else has said, specific issues. We do get caught up in the vote, and yes, the vote is important, but we really need to be talking about what it is specifically that we're voting about. So whether that's like better education, better healthcare, better roads, like whatever that is, I don't see a lot of people really diving into the actual effect that voting has, because voting is an investment into your community. And if people really understood what that really meant in real time, I think that it would be very beneficial in just talking about how these specific issues connect to our vote. So yeah, that's what I would say. And really just, what everyone else said as well.
Saying that voting is incredibly important, but accountability follows voting. And no matter how good a people we elect, they get to Montgomery, they get to Washington, and there are competing pressures and competing interests, and that we have to hold even the best, and I would include representatives, figures, and, in this, we have to hold them accountable to remember who sent them there and what the needs of their district are, with love and with gentleness, but we also need to make sure they hear from us. Those of you who are Arise members, you're going to be getting an action alert next week about what's going on next week in Washington, and the calls that you have got to make, the emails you've got to send, because they're going to be making some tough decisions that are going to affect every single one of us back here in Alabama.
I totally agree with that. One of the things that we do when we're talking with people is we stress to them that voting is the beginning, not the end. once you elect someone, you have to hold that person accountable, and you have to make sure that you are engaged and involved on every level, and not just on the federal level, but you've got to be involved on your city council. You got to be involved in your county commission. You got to be involved in your state legislature, and then also, of course, your congressional member, because the truth of the matter is that the cliche that all politics are local is true. The biggest gain or improvements to people's lives start at home. It starts on a local level. And oftentimes we find that the voters that we're talking to have issues that a lot of times they're only voting in the federal elections, but the issues that are impacting them the most are on the local level. So it's important that people are educated and understand that these elected officials are their employees. They work for them. And just like an employer can release an employee, voters can release the person that is representing them if they're not representing them well. So we have to encourage people to stay actively engaged and involved on every level all the time. And our organizations are an integral part of making sure that people are adequately informed and educated so they can participate.
Yes. And one thing I did want to highlight, what piggyback of what Khadidah said, was really focusing on the issues at hand. I know that even through this general election, we had a communication center, Tops held the communication center, and received a lot of calls. One of the biggest issues, there was a survey done through Palmer Gilliland, who was actually our data guy, was that equity inclusion was one of the largest things that was on that request. Having transportation for people that have disabilities, making sure they have access to the polls, those things, even though there was, rise to the polls and so on, there wasn't wheelchair accessible vehicles. Those things that we need to really think about, those folks that are hearing impaired and visually impaired. And so as we move into this local election, as we track that data internally within ourselves, we were able to see like these were the gaps, right? So I think that it's a push for us to continue to collect our own data. And like you said, that storytelling, to find out when they call that they didn't know their polling location was switched at the last minute. People that have been voting for decades never knew where they needed to go. And so we need to collect those stories and turn that into our own data so that we're able to analyze and actually, turn these communities out when it comes to the local elections.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I would also love to talk to the folks in terms of a narrative. For Khadidah, your experience as a plaintiff. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yes. Which part?
I guess a better question would be, right, in that role, you were representing the needs of the whole district at a very high level. And you can tell, in a way, the story, right, the needs of the district, of your representation, but it's on behalf of so many folks in D2. So if, of course, not speaking for, but on behalf and as part of District 2, what was that like, telling that narrative on a bigger stage, if you will?
Yeah. Can I start with I guess how I got started? I think that would be better. Is that a better?
Please, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So in 2020, I got accepted. There's a coalition called Southern Coalition for Social Justice that's based out of South Carolina. And I was chosen as a Crowd Fellow. And Crowd means community redistricting organizations working towards democracy. And so within that fellowship, we were tasked with the responsibility of educating people in specific areas across Alabama, but also we were trained in GIS mapping. And so that's really where a lot of my experience came from. So I started with, and this is kind of right as I started with Alabama Forward. So I started with educating certain communities within the Black Belt, trying to get, their opinions on how current conditions were, what that looked like for them, but also letting them know, hey, we have a redistricting coalition, that's a redistricting process is coming up. Alabama Forward has a redistricting coalition. So starting with there, and then also the training in the GIS mapping software, training these communities and allowing them to see this is what your community looks like. This is how many people are in it. These are the different various ways on how you can access this software, how you can be trained in this software. So that's really how it started. And then it led into like the redistricting coalition, which then led until eventually the case. My experience as a plaintiff, I was really there like from the beginning, whether that was like synthesizing data, talking to communities across the state. But it wasn't just me. It was also 3 other fellows that also were a part of this fellowship that were tasked with the same responsibility across Alabama. And one of the other fellows was also Shalila Dowdy, who's also another plaintiff in the case. And this wasn't, I think people have this like misconceived notion of like, oh, it's glamorous. It was not. Nothing glamorous came out of that. It was very hard work. It was nights where I was staying up till 3 a.m. trying to determine like if this district had and I'm gonna get really nerdy, if it had like a deviation of 1, which is like trying to basically make the district even so that it has an even number of people. So it was very like strenuous nights. I think the travel also took a toll on me. That was a lot, traveling to various conferences to speak about the new congressional district. So I'm very glad that we did get a representation that would hear the needs out for specifically Black Alabamians. But it definitely was a very challenging and but rewarding part of season of my life. So that's what I would have to say.
Thank you so much. And I'd also like to pose a question to Letetia, also a plaintiff. There's much work to do in terms of continuing the voter representation and the turnout. In the wake of this election, what does that look like going forward for voters in District 2?
Yes. So what people really should understand is that the fight continues. We won the battle, but we still have to fight the war. We have a full-blown trial that's going to start next month to determine whether or not we even get to keep this district, right? The district, we were allowed to, we won the right, not allowed, but we won the right to have the map redrawn and redrawn in a fair way, right? But that was because the lower courts ruled that if we went to trial, we would more than likely prevail. However, we now have to go to trial and prevail. That's the first thing. People should understand and know that. And in understanding and knowing that their engagement and involvement is important, right? Knowing that if they have the ability and the opportunity or even the desire to show up at the federal building next month when trial begins, to be in the audience, to show a level of support, and to also make sure that they're understanding that they understand that unless they participate, right, all of the work that we've been doing is for naught. And one of the reasons why I got involved in the case in the first place is the fact that I felt that we had not had any representation in our district, in our area for a very, very long time. Whenever I needed to know anything on the federal level, whenever I needed to access anything on the federal level, whenever I even wanted to make my voice heard as to how I feel about an issue, I normally would go to Representative Sewell's office. She was not even my representative because I did not live in her district, but because I am a Black woman in Alabama, and she is the only Black representative that understands our issues and the priorities of our community, I went to her. I didn't always, I would, anytime I would reach out to my actual representative, I would end up getting a form letter that, no, we don't believe in that. This is what we believe. None of the issues that were important to me were important to my previous representative. And in fact, I didn't really even start getting communications from the congressional member until after I became a plaintiff in the lawsuit. And then I started getting communications via email. But the bottom line is none of the issues that are important to me and my community were important to my representative. So we had no representation. So for me, it was important to get involved, to put a face on the fact that we need representation. We need someone that's going to understand, and not only understand, but have direct knowledge of the issues that impact Black communities across this state, and have those issues be a part of the table. Representation matters. That's a mantra that you'll hear me say all the time. It's important who's at the table right, representing your interests when decisions are being made. Because if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. And that means that the first thing that gets cut are things that are important to your community, to your family, to you personally, right? And so I think there was no better way to demonstrate the importance of having a voice than to be a part of this lawsuit.
Thank you so much. Now, before we turn it over to questions from the audience, I'd like to pose a question to all of our panelists. We have a new administration coming in. D2 has new representation in Washington as well. Looking ahead, how will that affect the work that y'all are doing? And if you could send a message to Washington, what might you say?
We're going to be sending lots of messages to Washington. I will say I was very excited this morning to get up and see that Representative Figures has been appointed to this House Agriculture Committee, because the Agriculture Committee has jurisdiction over the SNAP food assistance program, what we all call food stamps. That's going to be a major battle. It's going to be a battle starting next week. With whether or not they cut food assistance to the people who need it the most in Alabama and the country. And so I was really glad to see that Senator Figures has waded into those waters. We're going to be looking for him for really strong help in that area. So I take some hope, but we are all gearing up for battle.
Well, we're going to first start over with the state level.
Okay.
I would like to see more changes definitely in the pardon and paroles, and I'm hoping that Figures' experience with the White House and in particularly with DOJ, ADOC, which is Alabama Department of Correction, really needs to be looked into for a lot of this inhumane treatment, and also those that have served their time should be released vastly. Also on the federal level, that we see more clemency, that we see more pardons coming. As you know, Biden has actually pardoned a lot of folks that they felt that were in prison a long time and who have done a large percentage of their time. However, we know that there's harm coming to the state of Alabama for those that are organizers, that are in the fight for our democracy, and a lot of them still need to be pardoned. So I think on the federal level, there's policies that need to be changed on the local level, first of all, but the federal level needs to be backing up the state level to make sure that people are receiving fair justice and being released, and also out of harm's way, and that are going to be harmed by being still confined within federal confinement or state confinement.
To our other panelists, how does the incoming change in Washington affect D2? And if you could send a message to our elected officials, what might you say?
I would say, I guess like the message I would send to elected officials is don't lose sight of like the people who elected you. But I also want to send like I will also say in relation to like the work that we do, I think it's very important to like educate people on how these processes work. I think we can be very, I think we can assume people just know, but like a lot of people don't know a lot of people don't even know where the State House is, knowing that Montgomery is the capital. So I do think that it's important for us, folks that are like on the ground, to really engage people on a way that keeps them engaged and not so much of a way where we're only seeming to tap in when it's time to vote. I think it's important to keep folks engaged and educate people every day for the rest of our lives, or like whatever it takes. So that's a message that I would say to us, but then like really back to the elected officials part, really keeping your constituency engaged into what you're doing. I think it's very important so that folks aren't searching everywhere. You know, I think, at least in my experience, I found it really hard for some elected officials to keep up with what the actual policies that they're working on. So that's what I would say with elected officials, to just make it easier for folks to tap in with you and the work that you're actually doing for our community, so that, you know, that we can all just be on the same line of communication.
So I would say, as it relates to our work will remain the same, which has always been to engage and involve and educate our constituents, and primarily we focus on, as I said earlier, infrequent voters. And in working with infrequent voters, understanding, helping them, to understand the importance of their engagement. And I would just echo what Khadidah said about education, because one of the things that we found out is people don't really understand how the system works, how government works, what elected officials are and are not able to do, what the president is and is not able to do. I think a lot of folks, a lot of voters, particularly infrequent voters who generally only vote in federal elections, thinks that once the president is elected, the president can do anything they need for the president to do to address their issues. But what the reality of it is that people need to understand that even though it is a powerful position and it has a strong bully pulpit, the president cannot pass legislation that's going to impact our direct lives. And the people that pass the legislation that impact their direct lives are their representatives, their senators and their House members on the federal level. And then, of course, on the local level, the elected officials there. So we will continue to educate voters so voters really understand what is possible and their role in it, and understand how important their role is to it. Because oftentimes we find that, elected officials get elected and then you don't see them again until it's time to be reelected again. That narrative has to change. And the only way that narrative changes is that the voters that represent that voted for that official force a change. And so we educate voters on that. We educate voters on making sure that you are engaging and reaching out to your elected official and understand what's even possible, and that your elected official knows what issues are important to you. In that education, we also, and it was mentioned earlier, we also connect actual priorities and things that are affecting communities day to day to issues, to policy, to where they can be impacted, and help people to understand how their power can be collectively used to make change. So our work fundamentally will not change because of the new administration. Because in Alabama, we are used to that, right? We are used to working, swimming upstream, right? And we won't stop that. But what we will do is redouble our efforts and make sure that people understand and are actively engaged in the process. And because I believe that once you tickle that sleeping bear and the bear wakes up, he's not going to sleep again. So that's an analogy I said for voting. The voters that we have awakened an excitement within them. They see it, particularly in District 2. They see that it is possible to win. It is possible when you collectively come together to win, to put your issues on the table. Now, we have to also understand that there is only one vote out of 435, right? So we have to help them understand what that means as well. The message I would send is math is math. 1 + 1 will always equal 2. The demographics in the state of Alabama and in this country are changing, and they are not going back. So you need to pay attention, because we are not going to slow down. We are not going to be scared. We are not going to cower. We are going to continue to come at you and regain our power.
Thank you so much, Letetia. That was an amazing note to end on. We certainly would encourage everyone watching and our guests here today to continue that engagement, to continue that education. Engagement is very important to us at the Gulf States Newsroom. We'd love to get a group photo of everyone who's on the panel. So if we could just take a moment to be camera ready, and my colleague Tyler will take a screenshot of everyone. We've also got some pictures here on the live that we've got Rodreshia running. Gorgeous. Thank you so much. We want to commemorate that we're having these conversations. For my panelists, thank you so much for being here today. My colleagues Tyler Pratt and Andrea Miller for tapping in as digital producers and introductions, to Hilltop Public House for being our partner in community engagement, and to everyone who's listening and following the stories of District 2. I'd like to thank everyone so much for being here today. And we invite everyone to stay in touch with the many ways that you can follow the work of the Gulf States Newsroom. You can email us, connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org. You can follow our Instagram @Gulf States Newsroom. You can subscribe to our podcast, The Gulf States Gumbo, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, tune to your local NPR station in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, for more of these stories from the Gulf States Newsroom. Thank you all so much. This will be available as a YouTube recording. We'll have that posted and shared out on our channels as well. A deep, wholehearted thank you to everyone. We look forward to continuing to tell the stories of District 2. Take care.